We're in the lab at Diverse Dimensions today, and we've got to do some reverse engineering on this chair part here. And I've got another module as well that'll show a 2D freehand scan. We're going to do that as well on this, but today we're going to use splines as our output data as opposed to polylines that we used before. So very organic geometry on this chair part. Looks like it's got some curves just every place on here, except for where the seat goes. That's a pretty straight line, as well as the bottom of the legs here. But just the design of this chair looks like everything is so organic. So I'm going to put these in as splines today. But one thing I do want to make a note of is for sure remember this too. When you do splines as a 2D freehand scan, you don't have the ability to extract points from the data set. Say if I was coming around this curve here and I came off and then I came back down, you don't have the ability to pluck those extra points out that were solved as you were coming away from that chair part. So polylines works great for that. But what I usually like to say, though, is test both the splines and the polylines in your CAD system. So once you do an export out of your CAM2 session as an IGES and you pull that in, take a look at both the polyline and the spline in your system just to see what works better for your system. So I'm going to set up a fixture for this, and I'm going to get right into the scan here in this 4.0 or in this SAT file. So hang tight for just a second while I build up this fixture and we'll jump in. You'll notice in my SAT file, I've got the back already tracked here as a spline coming up over the top, and then the seat pan here, and then just the front of that leg. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to just continue on, get this detail right through here, and then hit this middle section right here as well. And the way I'm going to do that is I'm just going to run over here to the Measure menu, Scan, Freehand Scan. Now notice I've got the radio button checked here for a 2D freehand scan, and I've got the quartile option checked right here. So instead of getting into a big discussion on what all of this stuff is here, at the end of the video I've got a couple bullet points that will talk about each of these options here. So don't worry about those right now. I've just got all those set to 0.010 of an inch. And then I'm going to save this scan as an open spline. So I'll say OK to that. And then I've got to put this down, since it's a 2D feature, I've got to put it to some plane. I've got the tabletop defined, so I will say OK to that. Now notice last time I did this scan, in the bottom left-hand corner of my screen here, it says that while triggered, the scan mode is selected. And that's the X key. I'm going to hit the X key here. Notice that it toggles back into single point mode. Hit the X again, it pulls back to scan mode. 100% of the time that I do these 2D freehand scans, I always hit that X key. I always put it into scan mode for that. Okay, so I'm set. I'm going to grab this arm now. I'm going to go right into this front area here, and I'm going to finish up the leg. And what I would do is, since this is contoured a little bit, it's maybe had a little radius to the cutter or whatever, I would probably pick up on a gauge block and set this probe down into the gauge block as I tracked around the geometry, just to make sure I've got a consistent height on the scan line that I'm putting onto here. But I don't have that for this example here. I'm just going to show you just by holding the probe at a set height here and just following it around. So I'm going to hit the green button here and just drag the probe along. And then I'll come around the leg here. And then I'll come around this leg here. And then I'll finish up by coming around. And as soon as I let go, the stream stops. And then I'm going to hit the back button just to compensate. Even though I'm not compensating for the size here, I am just saving this as a stream. And that's a good thing to note too, is when I'm taking these points on this 2D freehand scan, I'm only tracking the center of the probe. CAM2 doesn't know the vector of approach that I'm coming in at as I'm coming around and doing all of these scans. So it's only tracking the center of the probe. So when you IGES this out and you bring that back into your CAD system, the total perimeter of this chair will have to be offset by 3 millimeters, or the radius of the probe, and that will have to be inboard. So now what I do is I would say OK to this, or yes to save the stream. And then there will save the results of that freehand scan. I'll say OK to that. And then notice it has formed all of the geometry here. That's the bottom of this seat. Now what I'd like to do is this middle section here is a closed spline. So let me run back up to the measure pull down. Go to scan. There's the freehand option. All the detail here is the same. I'm going to change this minimum distance to 10,000ths of an inch. But this time I'm going to go to the Save As, and I'm going to go to a closed spline as the option. And I'll say OK. And again, I need a plane to set this to, so I am going to select the tabletop again and say OK. Now when I pick up on the arm, I have got the fixture, or a piece of my fixture here, that's going to hold this chair in place. So I'm just going to be kind of careful coming around that. Maybe that's a good idea to use that as a start point and a stop point, so I kind of know where I was. So what I'll do is I'll start right there and I'll just follow it around, trying to be about the same height all the way around. And I'm holding down the green button as I'm making this this path around here. Oh, and say, yep, had a fixture piece there I had to work my way around. And there's about where I started, so I'll stop right there. I'll let go of the green button, and then I'll hit the red button to compensate, or to save that stream. And then back into the SAT file here, I'm going to say yes to that stream, and then here it saves the results of that stream. Say OK. All right, well that kind of looks like what I was scanning. I will window into this area here. Notice it has closed that spline. It is truly a full perimeter spline. But yep, right here I had a little bit of a hiccup. Okay, well, it would be sweet if I could go into the Measure pull-down menu to scan, and let's remove some of the points from that spline. Ooh, and as I click on there, just notice I don't have a polyline to edit. It's not allowing me to click any place on that spline and take these points out of that line and have it resolve for that area there. So just remember that when you guys get into these 2D freehand scans, if you're going to use a spline, you don't have the ability to extract points out if you fell off the surface like I did there. But always remember, when you guys do these scans, you're only tracking the center of the probe. You're not using the edge or the equator of the probe. And I will prove that to you. I will zoom in on this area right here maybe. And if I take my probe, or if I go to the Measure menu and I hit Inspect XYZ, what it's going to do is it'll show the location of my probe, and I'm going to pull it into this area right here. So notice on my screen, when I come into that area, notice that that probe is hitting kind of in that middle section as I work my way around there. So I didn't scan the equator of that probe, I was scanning right to the middle of that probe. So that's a good way just to make sure that your scan isn't to the outside of the probe, it's truly to the center of that probe. So just don't forget that when you guys go and export that out. Change the size inside of your CAD file to give it that full perimeter, and it would be 3 millimeters different than what you see here, since I was using a 6 millimeter probe.